A perfect party, planned by someone who had it all, is transformed by someone no one expected. What happens when opposite worlds collide? Henry Anderson took a deep breath as he gazed at New York City through the glass walls of his Upper East Side penthouse. Below, the city pulsed with a frenetic rhythm that he had mastered like a conductor for more than 2 decades. The orange, sunset sky contrasted with the gray of the buildings, creating a perfect frame for what he considered his true home, the top. At 47, Henry was the living image of success in American business circles. His graying temples, carefully trimmed, matched his custom-made Italian suit. His hands, always impeccably manicured, held a glass of wine while his eyes, a deep brown that rarely revealed emotions, surveyed the horizon like someone calculating the value of each visible square foot. "Sir, the quarterly financial reports have arrived," announced Martha, his executive assistant of nearly 15 years, entering the room with a posture as rigid as the protocol he demanded. "Leave them on the table. I'll review them before the shareholders' meeting," he replied without shifting his gaze from the landscape. "Any news about the neurocardio fast launch?" The marketing team sent the final campaign for approval. The scientific department assured that clinical trials exceeded all expectations. "Excellent. With this medication, we'll capture an additional 18% of the market by the end of the year." VitalMed, which had begun as a small compounding pharmacy founded by his father in rural Pennsylvania, was now a biotechnology giant with branches in 7 countries. The leap had occurred under Henry's leadership, who transformed scientific knowledge into economic power, with the same precision with which he transformed chemical formulas into revolutionary medicines. "Sir," Martha hesitated. Something rare. In her habitual efficiency, the decorator called about tomorrow's party. "She needs final approval for some details." Henry finally turned, furrowing his brow. For a moment he seemed to have completely forgotten about the matter. "The party? Yes, of course. Claire's birthday." 7 years, Martha added with a discreet smile. "She's very excited." Henry nodded, taking a sip of wine to mask his discomfort. Claire, his only child. The only aspect of his life that didn't follow spreadsheets or projections. The little girl who at 5 had lost not only her mother, but also the mobility in her legs in an accident he preferred not to remember. "Tell the decorator I approve everything she suggested. Don't economize. I want it to be the best children's party New York has seen this year." Martha made a quick note on her tablet. "And Claire's psychologist called this morning. She said it would be good if you could participate in the next session." A heavy silence settled in the room. Henry placed the glass on the center table with a movement that was too precise. "Let her know I'll check my schedule," he finally replied, in a tone that ended the subject. When the assistant left, Henry walked to the other end of the penthouse. The 5,000-square-foot apartment was decorated with a minimalist elegance that looked more like a contemporary art gallery than a home. The white walls displayed paintings signed by renowned artists, and each piece of furniture had been chosen by an award-winning decorator. Everything there spoke of power, sophistication, and distance, except for one hallway. At its end, a door stood out as the only one with color in the apartment, turquoise blue, hand-painted with small golden stars. Henry stopped in front of it, adjusted his tie in an automatic gesture, and knocked softly before entering. Claire's room was a universe apart. While the rest of the apartment followed a neutral color palette, here exploded blues, purples, and gold in a galaxy and stars theme. Her professional telescope rested near the window, and the shelves were filled with books on astronomy, physics, and mathematics, unusual interests for a 7-year-old, but Claire had never been ordinary. The girl was sitting in her adapted wheelchair, in front of a special desk where she was assembling what appeared to be a complex model of the solar system. Her brown hair was tied in a loose braid, and her eyes, identical to her father's, concentrated on the task with impressive intensity. "How's the brightest scientist in New York doing?" Henry asked, in an attempt to sound casual. Claire looked up, and a shy smile appeared on her face. "Hi, Dad. I'm finishing my project for the science fair." I thought the fair wasn't until next month. It isn't, but I want to have time to test all my hypotheses. Henry approached, observing his daughter's meticulous work. In moments like this, he recognized himself in her, the same determination, the same attention to detail. It was like looking in a mirror that reflected not just his DNA, but also his obstinacy. "Excited for tomorrow?" he asked, lightly touching the girl's shoulder. Claire shrank almost imperceptibly. "Do you think anyone will come?" The question caught Henry off guard. It wasn't something he had considered. In his world, when you organized an event and invited people, they simply showed up. It was a matter of influence and power. "Of course, we sent invitations to your entire class, to the children of the company executives, to the neighbors in the building." "But nobody talks to me at school," Claire interrupted, turning her attention back to her planetary model. "They look at me as if I were different." Henry felt something uncomfortable growing in his chest. It was a sensation he rarely experienced. Powerlessness. He could buy competing companies, influence politicians, set prices that affected millions of people, but he couldn't make children treat his daughter as an equal. "Tomorrow will be different," he assured, with the same conviction he used to reassure investors in times of crisis. "I hired the best children's event team in the city. There will be attractions that no child will want to miss." Claire nodded, but her eyes said she didn't really believe it. At 7, she already understood what many adults took a lifetime to realize: some distances cannot be shortened with money. "Can I show you something?" she asked, changing the subject. Without waiting for an answer, she maneuvered her wheelchair skillfully to her bookshelf and picked up a large, colorful book. "I found this map of Native American constellations. Did you know that indigenous peoples had their own stories about the stars?" Henry looked at his watch discreetly. A video conference with Chinese investors awaited him in 20 minutes. But something in Claire's genuine enthusiasm made him sit on the edge of the bed. "Show me," he requested, surprising himself. For nearly half an hour, Henry listened to Claire explain about the Orion's belt, the Pleiades, and other constellations that indigenous peoples saw in the North American sky. The girl spoke with passion, and for a few moments the relentless businessman allowed himself to just be a father. When he finally left the room, promising to return for dinner, Henry felt a restlessness different from any corporate concern. Claire's birthday the next day needed to be perfect, not just for status or appearances, but because somehow that he didn't yet fully understand. That quiet and brilliant girl deserved much more than he had been able to offer until then. The next morning, the penthouse was buzzing with activity. Decorators, waiters, entertainers, and sound technicians transformed the building's event hall into a scene worthy of a movie. The Enchanted Universe theme combined astronomical elements with touches of fantasy, creating an impressive environment even by the elevated standards of the luxury building's residents. Henry supervised everything with the same rigor he applied to audits in his company. The lighting had to be perfect, the buffet had to offer options for all possible dietary restrictions, the games needed to be both fun and educational. Nothing escaped his critical eye. "Mr. Anderson," called Teresa, the event coordinator, "we've brought the party favors for your approval." She opened a golden box containing miniature planets in crystal, each inside an illuminated dome. It was a gift too expensive for a children's party, but Henry approved with a nod. "And the cake?" he questioned. "It will arrive 1 hour before the party. It's an exclusive creation by pastry chef Philippe, 5 tiers with mapped projection on the layers and edible gold leaf finishing." Henry nodded, satisfied. Everything was as planned, except for one detail he couldn't control: the guests. Meanwhile, in her room, Claire watched the activity through the window. She wore a beautiful royal blue dress with appliques resembling stars. Her hair had been arranged by a stylist specialized in children's hairstyles, and even her wheelchair had received a special decoration, with LED lights creating a constellation effect on the wheels. She looked beautiful, and she knew it. But beauty had never been her problem. The problem was the silence that surrounded her since the accident. The problem was the look of pity that replaced friendship. The problem was that no matter how much her father tried to buy happiness in the form of a party, Claire knew there were things that all the money in the world couldn't acquire. Still, she decided to smile. For her father, who despite all his failings was trying, and for her mother, who always said that smiles have the power to transform realities, even when our hearts are tight. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. The clock marked 3 in the afternoon when Henry checked his phone for the 10th time in 15 minutes. The party was officially starting, and the magnificently decorated hall remained empty. The impeccably dressed waiters circulated aimlessly among tables of untouched sweets. The hired DJ played animated music for no one, while costumed characters dressed as astronauts and magical beings rehearsed forced smiles. Claire was positioned near the entrance in her decorated wheelchair. She tried to maintain her composure, but her eyes anxiously followed every time the door opened, revealing only another event staff member or a delivery person with additional materials. Maybe they're all running late, Henry suggested, crouching beside his daughter. Traffic in New York is unpredictable, you know. Claire nodded without really believing. She knew all too well the averted gazes in the school corridor, the party invitations that never came, the conversations that ceased when she approached. It wasn't traffic that prevented the children from coming. It was the social invisibility that her wheelchair seemed to create around her. After the first hour, Henry began receiving messages. His phone constantly vibrated with elaborate excuses, sudden family emergencies, forgotten commitments, children mysteriously falling ill in the last few hours. Each notification was another stab to his pride, but mainly to Claire's heart. "Daddy," she finally called with a voice so calm it broke Henry's heart. "Can we cut the cake? I'm a little hungry." Henry looked at the monumental cake, a culinary work of art that cost the equivalent of many of his employees' quarterly salaries. It was destined to be the highlight of a celebration that now wouldn't happen. "Of course, Princess," he replied, signaling to the team. "Let's cut the cake." The event coordinator seemed embarrassed, as if the party's failure was her responsibility. She approached with a professional smile. "Mr. Anderson, we've prepared the sequence for the cake moment. We have the theme music, the lighting effects, the metallic paper shower, and the mapped projection. Should we proceed with everything?" Henry looked at Claire, who was watching one of the entertainers trying to entertain an empty hall with juggling. "Just the cake. No spectacles," he decided. "Bring a slice for my daughter." The woman nodded and walked away. Henry had never felt so defeated in his entire career. He could buy the best of everything, but he couldn't buy true friendships for Claire. It was a bitter lesson for a man accustomed to solving any problem with his financial power. It was in this moment of uncomfortable silence that the building's security guard entered the hall, walking hurriedly toward Henry. "Mr. Anderson, excuse me for bothering you, but there are some children at the side gate. They say they saw the party balloons and want to know if they can come in." Henry frowned, confused. The Parkview Towers was one of the most exclusive in the area, with a rigorous security system. How would unknown children have gotten there? "What children are these? Relatives of residents?" "No, sir. Apparently they're from the Riverside Heights community across the park. They saw the balloons and heard the music." Henry's first reaction was refusal. His class preservation instinct, cultivated through years of exclusive association, screamed that it wasn't appropriate. The building had strict rules about visitors, and the other residents would certainly not approve. Before he could verbalize his refusal, he realized that Claire had approached and was listening to the conversation. "Can I see them?" she asked, surprising both her father and the security guard. Henry hesitated, but something in Claire's determined look, so similar to his own when facing business challenges, made him reconsider. "Just a minute," he said to the security guard, and turned to his daughter. "Claire, we don't know these children. We don't know anything about them." "Nobody came, Dad," she replied simply, "and I really wanted to have a party with other children." The simplicity of that statement completely disarmed Henry. Behind all, the luxury and planning was the fundamental desire of a girl to share her birthday with other children. It didn't matter who they were. "Bring them to the entrance of the hall," he ordered the security guard. "We'll meet them first." Minutes later, 5 children were standing at the door of the event hall, looking with fascination at the environment that revealed itself before them. The leader of the group was a girl of approximately 10, with dark skin and tight braids decorated with colorful elastic bands. She wore a simple but clean blouse, jean shorts, and plastic sandals. Her lively eyes and confident posture betrayed someone accustomed to assuming responsibilities beyond her age. "Hi, I'm Jasmine," she introduced herself with surprising poise. "We saw the balloons from Mrs. Carmen's rooftop and came to see if there was any cool game happening." Beside her, a skinny boy of about 8, with a faded Rangers t-shirt, waved timidly. "I'm Will," he murmured. The others introduced themselves. In sequence, Pete, 6 years old, carrying a mysterious plastic bag, Amy, 5, with visibly too large flip-flops, and Matt, 7, the most observant of the group, who analyzed everything with attentive and curious eyes. Claire maneuvered her wheelchair closer, her eyes shining with an excitement Henry hadn't seen in a long time. "I'm Claire," she said, "and today is my birthday. Would you like to come in?" There was a moment of silence as the children registered the wheelchair. Henry prepared himself for the discomfort that usually followed, the looks of pity, the inappropriate questions, the subtle distancing. But Jasmine just smiled more widely. "Cool. How old are you turning?" 7, replied Claire. "Same age as Matt. He has a birthday this month too," said Jasmine, gently pushing the boy forward. "We brought something for you. Show her, Pete." Little Pete stepped forward, opening the plastic bag he was carrying. From inside, he removed what appeared to be a small globe made of recycled materials, bottle caps, pieces of CD, fabric scraps, and colored paper. "We made it in the art workshop at the community school," Jasmine explained. "Matt said we should bring a gift if it was a real party." Claire received the globe with teary eyes, examining every detail of the handcrafted work. "It's the most beautiful one I've ever seen," she said sincerely. Henry observed the scene, divided between cultural shock and an unexpected emotion growing in his chest. Those children, who had probably never entered a luxury condominium before, demonstrated a generosity and sensitivity that he rarely witnessed in his social circles. "Well, since you brought such a special gift, you're officially invited to the party," he finally declared, surprising himself. "We have cake, sweets, games, everything a birthday party needs. We're just a little short on other guests." "For real?" Will asked, eyes widening at the abundant tables. "We can eat all that?" Henry couldn't contain a smile. "Everything you want." Nothing more needed to be said. The children entered the hall as if they had just discovered a private amusement park. Will and Pete ran to the sweets table, while Amy was fascinated by the costumed characters. Matt approached Claire, curiously examining her wheelchair. "It has lights, looks like a spaceship," he commented, genuinely impressed. "Want to see how it works?" Claire offered, and before Henry could intervene, she was already showing the controls and explaining how she maneuvered the motorized chair. In minutes, what was before an empty and melancholic hall transformed into a space of authentic joy. Jasmine convinced the DJ to play hip-hop and popular songs that the children knew, and soon they were all dancing. Claire included, with Will and Matt taking turns to push her chair around the improvised dance floor. Henry remained on the sidelines, observing with fascination this unexpected integration. Claire was laughing, not politely smiling or nodding with rehearsed politeness, as she did in the rare social interactions she had. She was guffawing with the abandon and freedom that only children know. "Look, her chair can be a space rocket," shouted Pete, as they played an adapted version of tag, where Claire was always the mothership that coordinated the astronauts' missions. In no time, the staff hired for the party caught the spirit. The entertainers included Claire and her new friends in magic tricks and games. The DJ quickly learned the songs the children requested, and even the waiters seemed more authentic in their smiles as they served sodas and treats. "I've never seen the girl so happy," commented Teresa, the event coordinator, approaching Henry. "These children have a contagious energy." Henry just nodded, unable to articulate the whirlwind of thoughts that assailed him. Those children, who lived just yards from his luxury condominium but separated by high walls and security systems, had managed to do something that all his money and influence couldn't buy. They had brought genuine joy to his daughter. The party was in full swing when a new figure appeared at the entrance of the hall. An older woman with grey hair tied in a simple bun, with modest but impeccably clean clothes and a shopping bag in hand. Her gaze scanned the environment until locating the children, and an expression of relief and then confusion took over her face. "Jasmine!" "Voice!" she called, in a voice that mixed authority and affection. The children immediately stopped, recognizing the voice. Jasmine stepped forward, showing no guilt, but with evident respect. "Mrs. Zoe, we're at a birthday party," Claire invited. "Us." The woman approached, politely nodding to the party staff and finally to Henry, who stepped forward to receive her. "I'm sorry if they caused any inconvenience," she said with a quiet dignity. "I've been looking for them for almost an hour." "They didn't cause any inconvenience," Henry replied, extending his hand. "In fact, they saved my daughter's party. I'm Henry Anderson." "Zoe Sanders," she introduced herself, shaking the offered hand with surprising firmness. "I'm Jasmine and Will's grandmother, and I take care of the other three as well." There was a strange moment when their eyes met. Henry felt an inexplicable familiarity, as if he had seen those eyes before. Zoe also seemed to recognize something in him, but both disguised the moment of strangeness. "Please stay," Henry invited. "The children are having a lot of fun, and we have enough food to feed a battalion." Zoe hesitated, looking at the children who from a distance were making pleading gestures for her to allow them to stay. "I don't want to intrude on a private celebration," she replied, observing the luxurious environment with a mixture of admiration and discomfort. "You have no idea how much they've already given us today," Henry insisted, with a sincerity he rarely demonstrated. "We would be honored by your presence." Claire approached with Matt and Amy beside her wheelchair. "Please, Mrs. Zoe," she asked with that precocious maturity that always surprised Henry. "It's the best birthday I've ever had." Something in the simplicity of that request seemed to touch the woman. She smiled, a smile that illuminated her face marked by time and hard work. "In that case, it would be rude to refuse," she agreed, setting her shopping bag aside. "But I'll help serve. I don't feel right sitting still." "Absolutely not," Henry protested. "Today you are our guest of honor." The children cheered and soon dragged Zoe to participate in the games. To Henry's surprise, the woman had impressive energy, dancing, laughing, and even participating in an improvised karaoke competition. The next morning brought Henry a strange sensation, something between discomfort and curiosity. As he observed his reflection in the Italian marble bathroom mirror, he found himself mentally repeating the scenes from the previous day. The party that had begun as a fiasco had transformed into one of the most authentic experiences he and Claire had shared in years. "You have a video conference with the Japanese investors in 40 minutes, Martha reminded him, through the apartment's internal communication system. "And the board has requested your presence to discuss the acquisition of BioNexus this morning." "I'll be ready," he responded automatically, but his thoughts were far from the mergers and acquisitions that normally dominated his mornings. Henry followed his routine with mechanical precision, the perfectly fitted suit, the coffee prepared at the exact temperature, the brief look at financial market news on his tablet. But as the private elevator took him to the parking garage where his driver awaited, something bothered him deeply. "John," he called to the driver when they were already on their way to Vital Med headquarters. "Do you know Riverside Heights?" The man adjusted the rearview mirror, surprised by the unusual question. "I do, sir. It's right here, practically behind your building." "Why? Would you know how to get there?" John hesitated, clearly confused by his employer's sudden interest in a low-income neighborhood. "Certainly, sir. Would you like to go there?" Henry checked his watch. That morning's meetings were crucial for the company's expansion strategy. Canceling them would be imprudent from a business perspective. But for the first time in many years, something beyond business seemed urgent. "Not now. I have appointments." But this afternoon, after lunch, I'd like to make a visit. As you wish, sir. Throughout the morning, Henry conducted negotiations, analyzed spreadsheets, and made multi-million-dollar decisions with his usual precision. Externally, he was the same calculating and relentless executive as always. But internally, something had shifted, like a small gear that, out of place, subtly alters the functioning of the entire machine. "We'll acquire BioNexus for 30% less than the market value," he announced to the board, with the strategic coldness that characterized him. "They have cash flow difficulties, and our legal department has identified vulnerabilities in their patents that we can exploit as leverage in the negotiation." The board members nodded, satisfied with the aggressive approach. No one questioned the ethical implications of pressuring a company in difficulty. It was just business, the kind of business that had transformed VitalMed into an empire. At the end of the meeting, as everyone was leaving, Mark Botero, the financial director and closest friend Henry had in the corporate world, approached with an intrigued expression. "Is everything okay, Henry? You seemed distant today." "Just tired," he evaded. "Claire's party yesterday lasted longer than expected." "Ah, yes, the birthday. How was it? That caterer you hired must have been impressive." Henry hesitated, uncertain about how to describe what had happened. "It was different than planned." "I hope in a good way," Mark commented, without perceiving his friend's internal conflict. "In the best possible way," Henry replied, surprising himself with the sincerity of the statement. After lunch, ignoring the curious glances from his team, Henry left the mirrored VitalMed building and entered the car where John was waiting. "To Riverside Heights, sir." "Yes, and John, be discreet about this." The driver nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. The journey between the company headquarters, located on Park Avenue, and the community took no more than 20 minutes. But for Henry, it was like crossing an invisible border between parallel realities that coexisted in the same city. The corporate skyscrapers gave way to unfinished brick buildings. The wide, tree-lined streets transformed into narrow alleys that serpentined up the hillside. The meticulous order of the business world disappeared, replaced by a chaotic but surprisingly functional organicity. John stopped the car at the entrance to the community, where the asphalt ended. "Should I accompany you, sir?" "That won't be necessary. I'll be fine." Stepping out of the vehicle, Henry immediately felt displaced. His Italian suit and handcrafted shoes contrasted dramatically with the surroundings. People on the sidewalks observed him with curiosity, some with suspicion. A man selling fruit at a small improvised stand greeted him with a confused nod. Henry realized he hadn't planned this visit adequately. He didn't know Mrs. Zoe's exact address, nor how to find her in that labyrinth of alleys and side streets. "Can I help you, sir?" asked a young woman passing by, carrying a small child in her arms. "I'm looking for Mrs. Zoe's house," and he replied, feeling strangely vulnerable. "She takes care of 5 children. Jasmine, Will—" The young woman's face lit up in recognition. "Oh, Mrs. Zoe, of course, everyone knows her. It's the yellow house, 3rd alley to the right, going up to the small field." Henry thanked her and followed the instructions, aware of the gazes that accompanied him. The alley was narrow, with improvised steps in some stretches and electrical wires forming a chaotic web over his head. Children played freely, dogs roamed without leashes, and from various windows came conversations, music, and the aroma of home cooking. It was a world completely different from his own, but surprisingly alive. As he climbed, Henry realized that despite the evident material scarcity, there was a wealth of another nature there, a community vitality that didn't exist in his luxury condominium, where neighbors barely greeted each other in the elevator. Finally, he found the yellow house, modest but well-maintained, with a small garden of plants in recycled pots. He hesitated before knocking on the door. What would he say? Why had he really come here? Before he could organize his thoughts, the door opened and Matt appeared, widening his eyes upon recognizing him. "Aunt Zoe!" shouted the boy, without taking his eyes off Henry. "It's Claire's dad!" In seconds, the other children appeared, all talking at once, excited about the unexpected visit. Jasmine, always the most outspoken, stepped forward. "Hi, Mr. Henry. Did you come to visit us?" Before he could answer, Mrs. Zoe appeared at the door, drying her hands on an apron, her expression mixed surprise and quiet dignity. "Mr. Anderson," she greeted. "What a surprise." "I hope I'm not intruding," Henry replied, feeling strangely unprepared, he who always dominated any social situation. "Not at all. Please come in." The interior of the house was simple, but impeccably organized and clean. The living room also functioned as a dining space, with a wooden table surrounded by mismatched chairs. The walls displayed children's drawings carefully framed and some family photographs. In a corner, improvised shelves made from fruit crates housed schoolbooks and some toys. "Would you like some coffee?" Mrs. Zoe offered, indicating the sofa for him to sit. "Yes, thank you." The children observed him with fascination, as if they couldn't believe that this figure from another world had materialized in their living room. "Did Claire come too?" asked Amy, looking hopefully at the door. "Not this time," Henry replied, feeling a pang of guilt. "She's in physical therapy now, but she was very happy with yesterday's party. She can't stop talking about you all." The little faces lit up with the information. Mrs. Zoe returned with a cup of strong aromatic coffee, very different from the gourmet espresso Henry usually drank, but strangely comforting. "Children, go play outside for a while so I can talk with Mr. Anderson," Mrs. Zoe instructed, with that tone that didn't admit contestation, but without harshness. Reluctant but obedient, the little ones left, but not before Jasmine asked, "Can we visit Claire one of these days?" "Of course," Henry replied, surprising himself with his own spontaneity. "I'm sure she would love it." When they were alone, a momentary silence settled. Mrs. Zoe sat in a chair nearby, observing Henry with perceptive eyes that seemed to see beyond the facade of a powerful man. "You didn't come all the way here just to thank us for the party, I imagine," she commented, direct as only people who have no time to waste can be. Henry appreciated the frankness. It was refreshing after the games of appearance and calculated communications of the corporate world. "Actually, I came to get to know better who these children are that brought so much joy to my daughter," he admitted, "and to understand how I can help." Mrs. Zoe took a sip of her own coffee, carefully considering her words. "Help is always welcome, Mr. Anderson, but I need to understand what kind of help you have in mind." Henry perceived the subtle distrust, not out of malice, but from experience. People like him probably only appeared in the community during election times, or for short-term charitable projects that served more to alleviate guilty consciences than to transform realities. "To be honest, I don't know exactly," he confessed, surprising himself with the vulnerability. "Yesterday I saw my daughter truly happy for the first time since the accident. That means a lot to me." Mrs. Zoe nodded, her eyes softening. Children have that power. They haven't yet learned to judge by appearances. "How did you end up taking care of all of them?" Henry asked, genuinely interested. Mrs. Zoe sighed, a sigh that carried too many stories. "Jasmine and Will are my grandchildren. My daughter had problems with substances and couldn't raise them. Matt is my nephew, son, of my brother who is serving time. Pete and Amy are children of a neighbor who passed away 2 years ago. There was no one else to care for them, and I couldn't let them be separated by the system." The simplicity with which she narrated such profound and difficult decisions impressed Henry. In his world, commitments of this magnitude involved contracts, lawyers, and responsibility clauses. And how do you manage? Financially, I mean. "I work as a cook in a restaurant in Park Slope. I do extra house cleaning when I can. And the community helps. Here nobody lets anyone go hungry, even if everyone has little." She paused, smiling slightly. "But the hardest part isn't the money. You know, it's getting spots in schools, access to doctors, medicines when they need them." Henry felt a growing discomfort. His company produced medications that, he knew, were inaccessible to people like Mrs. Zoe, even though they were essential. "Are the children in school?" he asked, slightly diverting from the subject that disturbed him. They were. The public school nearby closed for renovations 3 months ago, and the children were redistributed. But there weren't enough spots in the other schools in the region. Jasmine and Will got transfers, but the other 3 have been at home since then. 3 months without school? Henry couldn't hide his shock. We do what we can. There's a retired teacher in the community who gives volunteer classes twice a week, and Jasmine helps the younger ones with what she learns. Henry felt a mixture of admiration and indignation. While he spent fortunes on technological toys that Claire barely used, there were children a few yards from his condominium, deprived of the basics. Mrs. Zoe, I would sincerely like to help. I can talk to some contacts at the Department of Education about the school spots to start. The woman observed him for a moment as if evaluating his sincerity. That would be a blessing, Mr. Anderson. The children are missing important content. And what about health? Do they have regular medical follow-up? A slight embarrassment passed over Mrs. Zoe's face. When we can manage it. The health clinic has long lines, and appointments with specialists can take months. My company has a medical assistance program for employees. I can include the children in it without any problems. Mrs. Zoe straightened in her chair, an expression of firm dignity on her face. Mr. Anderson, I appreciate the offer, but I need you to understand one thing. I'm not asking for charity. If you want to help, I'll be grateful. But these children deserve opportunities, not handouts. Henry felt the weight of those words. It was exactly the kind of clarity he respected in business, but rarely found in other spheres of life. I completely understand, Mrs. Zoe, and I respect your position. What I propose isn't charity, but a correction of an inequality that shouldn't exist. At that moment, they were interrupted by animated shouts coming from outside. The children were returning, accompanied by a young man carrying a soccer ball. Aunt Zoe, Professor Richard is calling us for the math class on the court, announced Will, excited. The young man stopped at the door, surprised to see Henry. Sorry, I didn't know you had a visitor. Richard is a volunteer teacher from the Seeds of Tomorrow NGO, explained Mrs. Zoe. He teaches mathematics and sciences to the community children using games and sports. Richard, who couldn't have been more than 25, politely extended his hand. Richard Miller, pleased to meet you. Henry Anderson, he replied, shaking the young man's hand. What kind of activities do you develop? Richard's eyes shone with genuine passion. We combine mathematical concepts with physical games. Today, for example, we're going to work on fractions using the divisions of the soccer field. Children learn much more when they can visualize and experience the concepts. Fascinating, commented Henry, genuinely impressed. And how many children participate? We have about 40 enrolled, but the demand is much greater. We lack volunteers, materials, and mainly adequate space. The court we use is quite deteriorated. An idea began to form in Henry's mind. His condominium had first-class sports facilities that remained empty most of the time. Richard, does your NGO have any kind of partnership with private companies? A few, for specific donations. Why? Perhaps we could talk about this at another time. I have some ideas that might benefit your work. The children, impatient, were pulling Richard and looking hopefully at Mrs. Zoe. You may go, she authorized, but I want everyone back for dinner, understood? As the children said goodbye, noisily, Henry felt a connection with that place and those people that he couldn't explain rationally. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a reality that had always been there, but that he had chosen not to see. During the following week, Claire asked every day to visit her new friends. Henry, divided between his corporate responsibilities and the desire to see his daughter happy, finally gave in on a sunny Friday. He prepared himself for resistance from his staff, but surprisingly, both Claire's private nurse and Martha seemed to approve of the idea. I've never seen her so animated, commented Louise, the nurse, while helping Claire get ready. She even chose her clothes alone today, something simpler for playing. Claire indeed had opted for a comfortable set of pants and a blouse, very different from the elegant dresses she normally wore. Her face displayed an almost feverish expectation, and her eyes shone with a vitality Henry hadn't seen since before the accident. Dad, can we take some of my books? I want to show Matt the Native American constellations. Henry nodded, watching her carefully separate various volumes on astronomy. There was a genuine generosity in that gesture that deeply moved him. We can also take some games, he suggested. I'm sure they'll like your new tablet. Claire stopped what she was doing and looked at her father with a seriousness surprising for her 7 years. I don't think so, Dad. Will told me they don't have a cell phone or internet at home. I don't want to seem, showy. Henry felt simultaneously reprimanded and proud. His daughter, at just 7 years old, demonstrated a social sensitivity that he at 47 was still learning. You're right, Princess. Let's take only what we can share without constraints. When they arrived at Riverside Heights, Henry noticed that he felt less displaced this time. Some residents recognized him and waved, especially after seeing Claire in her wheelchair. This entire news of the friendship between the children seemed to have spread, creating a kind of tacit acceptance of his presence there. The children's joy at seeing Claire was explosive. They ran to the car before John could even help lower the wheelchair, all talking at once, eager to show their toys, their favorite places, their discoveries. "Claire, we made a special path for your chair," announced Will proudly. "Uncle Richard." And some construction guys helped level the entrance of the alley to our house. Indeed, Henry observed that the initial stretch of the alley leading to Mrs. Zoe's house had been leveled, with stones removed and holes filled, creating a reasonably smooth path for the wheelchair. "You did this for me?" asked Claire, visibly moved. "Of course," replied Jasmine, naturally assuming the role of spokesperson for the group. Friends have to be able to visit friends, right? That simple gesture, born of pure community solidarity, hit Henry with unexpected force. In his world, accessibility was a matter of technical norms and legal obligations. Here, it was a manifestation of genuine care and inclusion. Mrs. Zoe received them with the same balance between formality and warmth. She had prepared a simple but abundant snack: cornbread, homemade cookies, passion fruit juice. Claire was immediately integrated into the children's games, who had carefully planned activities that she could participate in even in the wheelchair. "They didn't sleep well last night. They were so anxious," commented Mrs. Zoe, observing the children with Claire. "Especially Matt. He and your daughter have a special connection, don't they?" Henry nodded, noticing how the quiet, observant boy seemed to flourish in Claire's presence, animatedly explaining about a book he was reading in the community library. "Claire has always been reserved," he commented, "even before the accident, but with him it seems she's found an equal." "Souls recognize souls," said Mrs. Zoe, with the quiet wisdom that seemed to characterize her, regardless of age or circumstance. While the children played in the small, outdoor area, Henry noticed that Mrs. Zoe seemed paler than at their last meeting, and occasionally placed her hand on her chest, like someone feeling a discomfort they were trying to hide. "Are you all right, Mrs. Zoe?" She smiled, deflecting. "It's just tiredness. The week was tough." But her smile didn't reach her eyes, and Henry, trained to detect weaknesses in negotiations, realized there was something more serious. He decided not to insist at that moment, but made a mental note to investigate later. The afternoon passed quickly, with Claire and the children creating an increasingly strong bond. When it came time to leave, it was difficult to convince Claire to go. "Can we come back tomorrow?" she asked as Henry helped her into the car. "Tomorrow I have an important meeting in the morning." "But maybe in the afternoon," he replied, surprising himself with the ease with which he now reorganized his priorities. On the way back, Claire talked non-stop about her new friends, about how Matt knew everything about dinosaurs, how Jasmine could do beautiful braids, how Will had promised to teach her to play soccer even in the wheelchair. "Dad," she said suddenly, with that seriousness that sometimes frightened him, "why don't they have the same things we do if they live so close?" The question caught Henry off guard. How to explain social inequality to a 7-year-old? "It's complicated, Claire. It has to do with different opportunities, with how our society is organized." "But it's not fair," she interrupted, with the moral clarity that only children possess. "Jasmine is much smarter than I am, and Matt knows more about science than any boy in my school. They deserve to have the same chances." "You're absolutely right," Henry agreed, feeling a knot in his throat. "It's not fair, and maybe we can do something to change that a bit." The next morning, Henry was reviewing reports in his office at VitalMed when Martha entered hurriedly, something unusual in her always controlled conduct. "Sir, I just received a call from your driver. It seems Mrs. Zoe was hospitalized last night. The children are alone and they're asking for you." Henry immediately stood up, leaving papers scattered on the desk. "Which hospital? What happened?" "Mercy General Hospital. Apparently she had a heart attack. John is with the children now, but he says they're very frightened." Without hesitation, Henry took his jacket. "Cancel my appointments for the rest of the day. And call Dr. Paul Mendoza from the Heart Institute. Tell him it's a personal emergency and that I need a favor." "Yes, sir. And what about the children?" "I'll pick them up personally and take them to the hospital. Please, tell Louise to prepare." Claire to go out as well. During the journey to the community, Henry made several calls. The first was to his personal lawyer, requesting that he check the children's legal situation in case something happened to Mrs. Zoe. The second was to the director of Mercy General, a former college classmate who owed Henry some favors, asking for special attention to the case. The third was to Mark Botero, briefly explaining the situation and asking him to take over the board meeting that afternoon. Arriving at Mrs. Zoe's house, he found the 5 children sitting on the small living room sofa, clinging to each other like frightened cubs. John, his driver, was trying to calm them with improvised stories, but the fear was palpable in the air. "Mr. Henry," exclaimed Jasmine upon seeing him, her eyes red from crying. "Grandma fell last night and couldn't breathe right. The neighbor took her to the hospital, but they wouldn't let us go with her." Will and Matt seemed in shock, while little Pete and Amy sobbed quietly. Henry felt an oppressive responsibility before that scene. Those children depended entirely on Mrs. Zoe, and now, somehow, on him as well. "We're all going to the hospital to see how she is," he announced, trying to sound calm and confident. "Claire is waiting for us in the car. Everything will be fine." On the way to the hospital, he explained to the children in simple terms what had happened. Mrs. Zoe had a heart problem that had worsened, but doctors were taking care of her. As he spoke, he observed in the rearview mirror how Claire held Matt's hand, offering a silent comfort that no adult word could provide. Mercy General Hospital was like most public hospitals, overloaded, with deficient infrastructure and dedicated professionals performing miracles with scarce resources. Thanks to Henry's call, they were received by the director personally and conducted to a less tumultuous waiting room. "She's stable now," explained the doctor, treating Mrs. Zoe, "but she had a significant heart attack. She needs an urgent catheterization and possibly an angioplasty. We're trying to get a spot in a hospital with the structure for the procedure." "How much time do we have?" asked Henry. "Ideally, it should be done in the next 48 hours, but the waiting list for cases like hers—" "It won't be necessary to." "Wait," Henry interrupted. "I've already arranged her transfer to the Heart Institute. The ambulance will arrive in an hour." The doctor seemed surprised, but clearly relieved. That's extraordinary, Mr. Anderson. The Heart Institute is a national reference." "When can we see her?" asked Henry, aware of the children's anxious gazes. "She's sedated but stable. 2 at a time can enter, for just 5 minutes." Henry organized a rotation, starting with Jasmine and Will. While waiting their turn, the other 3 cuddled around Claire, who told stories about constellations to distract them. When it was finally his turn to see Mrs. Zoe, Henry felt a tightness in his chest. Connected to monitors and IVs, she seemed much smaller and frailer than the strong and determined woman he had met. He approached cautiously, lightly touching her hand. To his surprise, her eyes opened. A weak smile appeared on her lips when she recognized him. "The children," she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. "They're fine. They're here with me. And Claire, don't worry." A tear rolled down her wrinkled face. "Take care of them, and if I can't—" "You'll be fine," Henry assured, with a conviction he wasn't sure he really felt. "We're transferring you to the best heart hospital in the country, but I promise that no matter what happens, the children will be safe." Mrs. Zoe weakly squeezed his hand, and in that simple gesture, Henry felt the weight of the trust she placed in him, a man she barely knew but to whom she was entrusting her most precious possession. When they left the hospital, it was already night. The children were emotionally and physically exhausted. Claire, perceiving the situation, surprised. Henry with a suggestion. "Dad, can they sleep at our house tonight? We have spare rooms, and that way we can go back to the hospital early tomorrow." Henry hesitated. Taking 5 children from the community to his luxury apartment seemed to cross some kind of invisible boundary. But what was the alternative? Leave them alone in Mrs. Zoe's house? "I think that's a great idea," he finally agreed. "What do you think, children?" Even concerned about Mrs. Zoe, the little ones couldn't hide their fascination with the idea of sleeping at Claire's house. Only Jasmine, with her precocious maturity, expressed hesitation. "But what if Grandma needs something? What if she wakes up and doesn't know where we are?" "We'll leave the number of my cell phone with the nurses," Henry assured, "and I promise we'll be the first to arrive at the hospital in the morning." At the apartment, Martha had already organized everything, according to Henry's telephone instructions. The guest rooms were prepared, a simple but nutritious dinner awaited them, and even some comfortable clothes for the children had been provided. During dinner, Henry observed how those children, even amid concern for their grandmother, maintained a natural politeness that many of the spoiled children of his business colleagues didn't possess. They thanked for each gesture, offered to help, and treated the space with reverential respect. After everyone settled in to sleep, the girls in one room, the boys in another, and Claire in her own room, but with the door open so they could see, Henry retired to his office and made another call. "Dr. Mendoza, this is Henry Anderson. Thank you for agreeing to personally treat Mrs. Zoe." "No need to thank me, Henry. Your generosity to the Institute over the years deserves reciprocation. I just reviewed the file that was sent. It's a serious case, but treatable. And what about the post-procedure medications? I understand they're expensive." There was a significant pause on the other end of the line. "Yes, especially the latest generation anticoagulants. Public assistance provides basic alternatives, but not the most effective ones for cases like hers." 1. "Of them is Cardioprotect, right?" asked Henry, referring to one of his own company's most profitable medications. "Exactly. It's the ideal protocol, but it costs about $2,000 a month. Unfortunately, it's out of reach for most public healthcare patients." Henry felt a wave of shame and indignation. His company produced a medication that could save lives like Mrs. Zoe's, but priced it at levels inaccessible to the population that needed it most. "She'll have the best possible treatment," he affirmed. "Cost is not an issue." After hanging up, Henry remained in his office, facing the illuminated city through the windows. A disturbing idea was beginning to take shape in his mind, an idea that challenged everything he had built professionally, but which resonated with something deeper that was awakening within him. He walked to the living room and opened his work folder, removing the cost and price spreadsheet for VitalMed's main medications. Cardioprotect, developed in their laboratories just 3 years ago, had a production cost of less than $300, but was sold for more than $2,000. The profit margin was absurd, even by pharmaceutical industry standards. He also took the demographic analysis of potential users in the United States. More than 450,000 cardiac patients could benefit from the medication, but fewer than 30,000 had access to it, basically only those with premium health insurance or resources to pay out of pocket. The numbers danced before his eyes, no longer as symbols of business success, but as evidence of a fundamentally unfair system that he had helped to build and maintain. "Can't sleep?" The soft voice startled him. Claire had maneuvered her wheelchair silently to the entrance of the office. "Just thinking about some work things," he replied, quickly closing the folders. "And you? Why are you awake?" "Matt is having nightmares about Mrs. Zoe. I stayed with him until he fell asleep again." She approached, looking curiously at the papers on the desk. "Are those medicines that Mrs. Zoe needs?" Henry hesitated, always reluctant to burden Claire with adult concerns. But in recent days, his daughter had been demonstrating an understanding of the world that constantly surprised him. "Yes, medicines that my company makes but that are too expensive for people like Mrs. Zoe." Claire frowned, processing the information. "But you're the boss of the company, aren't you? Can't you make them cheaper?" The question, in its childish simplicity, hit the core of the issue that tormented him. Henry smiled sadly. "It's not that simple, Princess. There are shareholders, investors, a board of directors, many people who expect the company to always profit more and more. More important than people getting well," persisted Claire, with that relentless logic of children. Henry had no answer. Or rather, he had an answer, but not one he was proud to give. For years he had justified the exorbitant prices of medications with arguments about research costs, development of new drugs, business sustainability, but before his daughter's pure gaze, these arguments seemed empty. "You're right, Claire. Nothing is more important than people getting well." He paused, making a decision that would change his life forever. "And I think it's time to do something about it." If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. The next morning, while the sun was still rising on New York's horizon, Henry was already up. He had slept little, but felt a clarity of purpose that he hadn't experienced in years. During the night, he had worked on his laptop, elaborating spreadsheets, calculating numbers, projecting scenarios. What had begun as an unease had transformed into a concrete plan. The children woke up early, anxious to return to the hospital. Claire, who normally had difficulty getting up in the morning, was already ready in her wheelchair, helping Amy comb her hair. "I prepared a hearty breakfast for everyone," announced Martha, who had arrived even earlier than usual. There was something different in her look as she observed the children, a mixture of curiosity and tenderness that Henry had never noticed before. During breakfast, Henry explained to the children what would happen that day. Mrs. Zoe would be transferred to the Heart Institute, where she would undergo a procedure to unblock her heart arteries. After that, she would need to stay hospitalized for a few days for recovery. "And where will we stay while she's in the hospital?" asked Jasmine, always practical. "Here with us," Henry replied without hesitation. "If you're okay with that, of course." The children exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. It was Matt, surprisingly, who verbalized the collective concern. "We don't want to be a burden, Mr. Henry. We can stay at our house. Jasmine knows how to cook, and neighbor Mrs. Marlene said she can check on us from time to time." Henry felt a tightness in his chest at the forced independence of those children, accustomed to managing in situations that no child should face alone. "I know you're all very responsible," he said, choosing his words carefully. "But I would feel more at ease knowing you're here, where we can go together to visit Mrs. Zoe every day. Besides," he added, looking at Claire, "my daughter has never been as happy as in the last few days, with you around." Claire smiled, confirming. "Please stay. We can play, study together. It will be like having brothers and sisters." The idea of being like siblings to Claire, whom they all knew was an only child, seemed to convince the children. Will, always, the most expansive after Jasmine, broke into a smile. "We can teach Claire a bunch of games that she doesn't know." So it was decided. After breakfast, they all departed for the hospital, where they found Mrs. Zoe already prepared for the transfer. She was conscious, though visibly weak, and the concern in her eyes diminished considerably upon seeing the children well cared for. "Mr. Anderson," she called when she had a moment alone with Henry, while the children were talking with a nurse in the corridor. "I don't know how to thank you." "There's nothing to thank me for, Mrs. Zoe. Your family brought joy to my house, especially to Claire. I'm the one who's in debt." The woman studied his face for a moment, as if seeking something beyond the polite words. "You've changed since we met. There's something different in your eyes." Henry didn't know how to respond. She was right, of course. Something fundamental had transformed within him, but he was still processing the extent of that change. "Don't worry about the children," he assured, slightly diverting from the subject. "They'll stay with us for as long as necessary, and when you return home, we'll have much to discuss about how I can help in a more permanent way." The Heart Institute ambulance arrived punctually. After many hugs and promises of daily visits, the children saw Mrs. Zoe depart for what everyone hoped would be a treatment that would restore her health. "Now," said Henry, gathering the group, "you have an important appointment this morning." "Hospital?" asked Pete, confused. School, Henry replied. Last night I made some calls. You three, he pointed to Matt, Pete, and Amy, are enrolled starting today at Parkside Academy, where Claire studies. It's a private school, but it has a scholarship program that coincidentally just received a generous donation from the Anderson Foundation. The children's eyes widened. Parkside Academy was known for its academic excellence and first-world facilities, something that children from Riverside Heights would normally only see from a distance. But our clothes, our materials, Jasmine began, concerned with the practical aspects. All provided, Henry reassured. Martha organized uniforms and all the necessary materials. As for Will and you, who are already enrolled in the public school, I spoke with the principal. You'll continue there so you don't lose your friends and teachers, but you'll participate in a reinforcement program after school at Parkside Academy itself. The children seemed stunned by the rapid changes in their lives. Claire, perceiving their discomfort, moved her chair closer. Matt will be in my class, she explained excitedly. I already spoke with Miss Denise. She said she'll love having another student interested in science. For the rest of the morning, the children were introduced to the new school. Henry observed from a distance, noting how Claire naturally assumed the role of guide, introducing teachers and explaining routines with an enthusiasm she had never shown before regarding school. After leaving the little ones settled and promising to pick them up at the end of the day, Henry headed to the Vital Med headquarters. On the way, he made a crucial call. Mark, I need an extraordinary board meeting this afternoon. It's urgent. Henry, the board is already a bit restless with your recent absences, warned the financial director. Rumors have started to circulate. Precisely why we need this meeting. I have an important proposal to present. Arriving at the company, Henry noticed the curious glances from employees. His behavior in recent weeks, early departures, late arrivals, distractions during meetings, had not gone unnoticed in the meticulous corporate culture he himself had helped create. In his office, he worked feverishly on the final details of his presentation. At 4 in the afternoon, he entered the meeting room where the complete board of directors awaited him, 12 men and 3 women, all in impeccable attire and expressions that varied between curiosity and apprehension. Ladies and gentlemen, Henry began, remaining standing, thank you for your presence at this extraordinary convocation. What I'm going to present today represents a significant change in Vital Med's strategy, but I believe it will be transformative, not only for our company, but for the entire American pharmaceutical industry. With mathematical precision and the eloquence that had made him famous in the corporate world, Henry presented the Open Doors program, an initiative to make essential medications accessible to low-income patients through a scaled system of prices and direct distribution. In practice, he explained, showing carefully elaborated graphs, we will reduce the price of our 20 most essential medications by up to 70% for families with income below $30,000 annually. To partially compensate for this reduction, we will implement a modest increase of 5% for the private market and premium health plans. A murmur ran through the room. Charles Drummond, the oldest of the board members, was the first to verbalize the collective shock. Henry, this is revolutionary, no doubt, but also potentially disastrous for our financial results. The shareholders would panic. On the contrary, Henry countered, advancing to the next slide. My projections show that although we'll have an initial reduction of approximately 22% in our profit margin in the first year, the expanded volume of sales and the tax benefits associated with social programs will compensate for much of this reduction. In the medium term, we estimate that the program will become financially neutral and eventually positive. Still, intervened Sandra Morell, representative of international investors, we're talking about a radical change in the business model we've built over decades. What motivated this so unexpected proposal? Henry hesitated. He had prepared purely rational and economic arguments, anticipating exactly this type of questioning. But, at that moment, he decided on the truth. Recently, I had a personal experience that made me see our industry from another perspective, he began, his voice assuming a more intimate tone. I met a woman who takes care of 5 children in a vulnerable situation alone. She had a heart attack and needed exactly cardioprotect, a medication that we produce at a cost of less than $300 and sell for more than $2,000. An uncomfortable silence took over the room. Everyone there knew about the exorbitant margins practiced by the industry, but rarely confronted them in such direct human terms. Our corporate mission states that we exist to promote health and quality of life through science, Henry continued. But in practice, we promote health only for those who can pay values that we ourselves know are inflated beyond any reasonable justification. Henry, interrupted Richard Torres, legal director, I understand your sudden humanitarianism. But we have fiduciary obligations to our shareholders. We cannot simply reduce profit margins for emotional reasons. This isn't about emotion, Richard, but about long-term strategic vision, Henry countered, returning to business terrain. The current model of the pharmaceutical industry is unsustainable. Public, governmental, and international pressure for fairer prices will only increase. Companies that anticipate this inevitable change will not only gain public goodwill, but a privileged position in a market that will inevitably transform. The discussion extended for more than 2 hours. For each objection raised, Henry had a carefully prepared response. For each financial fear, he presented an alternative projection. For each legal concern, he offered precedents and solutions. However, even with all his preparation and eloquence, he realized he wasn't winning the necessary support. Closed faces and skeptical expressions dominated the room. Finally, Charles Drummond asked to speak for what seemed to be the decisive intervention. Henry, I've always admired your vision and leadership, but I fear you're letting personal issues cloud your professional judgment. I propose that the board evaluates the program more calmly, while you take a few days to reflect. The message was clear. They were suggesting a temporary removal. In other words, they were questioning his leadership capacity. Before Henry could respond, the meeting room door opened, and Martha entered hurriedly, something completely outside her protocol behavior. "Excuse the interruption," she said, visibly agitated. "Henry, you need to see this urgently." She handed him a tablet where a news article was open. It was from the main news portal of the country, with the headline prominently displayed, "Pharmaceutical Giant Studies Revolutionary Program for Medication Access." Someone had leaked information about the Open Doors program, and the repercussion was explosive. The article detailed some aspects of the project and included testimonials from public health specialists and economists, most praising the initiative as pioneering and socially responsible. "This is on all portals," Martha informed. "Social media exploded. The company's shares have already risen 3% just with the rumor." Henry looked at the board members, who seemed as surprised as he was about the leak. But the initial impact of the news had completely changed the dynamics of the meeting. Now retreating from the program would be seen by the public as a betrayal of the announced values, potentially causing more damage to the company's image than any temporary reduction in profits. "It seems that the market is already reacting positively to the initiative," Henry commented, allowing himself a slight smile. "Perhaps we should reconsider the value of social responsibility, not just as an ethical obligation, but as a viable business strategy." The board members exchanged concerned glances. The situation had escaped from the control of the meeting room to the public arena. Now any decision would have to consider not just the cold numbers, but also external perception. "I propose a preliminary vote," suggested Sandra Millionaire'S surprisingly. "Not to approve the program in its entirety, but to authorize a pilot phase with rigorous monitoring of the financial and image results." It was less than Henry expected, but more than seemed possible just minutes ago. The vote resulted in a tight approval, 8-7 in favor of the pilot project, with immediate implementation for 5 medications, including Cardioprotect. Upon leaving the meeting, Henry was approached by Mark Botero, who had voted in favor, surprisingly. "I won't ask if you planned that strategic leak," said the financial director with a half-smile. "But know that regardless of the financial result, you have fundamentally changed the game for the entire industry." "I didn't plan the leak," Henry assured. "But I confess I'm not disappointed with the timing." While walking to his office, Henry received a call from the Heart Institute. Mrs. Zoe's procedure had been successful and she was recovering in the ICU, stable and with a good prognosis. An immense weight lifted from his shoulders. On the way to pick up the children at school, he reflected on the twists of the last few days. The program would still face fierce resistance, he knew that. He had put his career and reputation at risk. But for the first time in a long time, he felt that his professional actions were aligned with his personal values. Values he was rediscovering thanks to a birthday party that no one had attended. Arriving at the school, he found a scene that warmed his heart. Claire, surrounded by a small group of classmates, proudly introducing Matt, who had apparently already impressed everyone with his knowledge about American dinosaurs. Pete was playing on the playground with other children his age, while Amy showed colorful drawings to a teaching assistant. Will and Jasmine, who had been picked up from their school by John, were animatedly talking with Claire about the day's events. "How was the first day?" Henry asked, approaching. "It was incredible, Dad," exclaimed Claire with an enthusiasm he hadn't seen in years. "Matt was already chosen for the science fair, and the teacher said we can do a project together on native American astronomy. The school has a real science laboratory," added Matt, his eyes shining, "with microscopes and everything." The other children also shared their impressions, each more enthusiastic than the other. Only Jasmine maintained a thoughtful reserve. "What is it, Jazz?" asked Henry, noticing her silence. "It's just that. It's all very cool, Mr. Henry. But what happens when Grandma gets better? We'll go back to our normal life, right? I don't want the little ones to get used to things that we won't be able to have later." The maturity and genuine concern of the 10-year-old girl deeply moved Henry. He crouched down to be at her eye level. "Jasmine, I promise you that regardless of what happens, your education is guaranteed. Your grandmother and I will discuss the details when she's recovered, but some things won't go back to being as they were before, and that's a good promise." In the days that followed, while Mrs. Zoe recovered in the hospital, a surprisingly harmonious routine established itself in Henry's apartment. The children adapted quickly to the new school, and Claire flourished like never before. The constant presence of the new friends seemed to have awakened in her a confidence and joy that the accident had obscured. Henry divided his time between the hospital, where he spent hours talking with Mrs. Zoe about the children's future, the company, where he faced growing resistance from the more conservative sectors of the board, and the apartment, which had never been so full of life and noise. 1 week after the announcement of the Open Doors program, Henry was summoned to an emergency meeting with the complete board and the main shareholders. The atmosphere was tense when he entered the crowded room. "Henry," began Charles Drummond with unusual formality, "recent events have put us in a delicate position. On one hand, the public repercussion of the program has been extraordinarily positive. On the other, several investors have expressed deep concern about the impact on future profit margins." "I understand the concerns," Henry replied, maintaining his calm. "But the initial numbers confirm my projections. The reduction in margins is being partially compensated by the increase in sales volume and the significant improvement in our corporate image." "Still," intervened one of the largest individual shareholders, "the consensus is that the initiative, although admirable from a humanitarian point of view, represents a radical departure from the strategy that built this company. We need concrete guarantees that financial interests will continue to be prioritized." Henry immediately perceived what was happening. It was a veiled ultimatum. Either he partially retreated from his program, or he would face a motion of no confidence that could cost him his position. "Ladies and gentlemen," he replied after a moment of reflection, "I understand and respect your concerns, but I also firmly believe that we are facing a historic opportunity to redefine what success means in the American pharmaceutical industry." He paused, looking each one in the eyes before continuing. "If the definition of success is limited to profit maximization at any social cost, then perhaps I am no longer the appropriate person to lead this company. But if we can expand that definition to include positive social impact, long-term sustainability, and building a truly respected brand, then I believe the Open Doors program is just the beginning of a necessary and inevitable transformation." Tea. Heavy silence took over the room. Finally, Charles Drummond cleared his throat. "Given this inflexible position, We see no alternative but to propose your temporary removal from the presidency until we can reevaluate the situation more calmly." Henry nodded, showing no surprise. He had already expected this reaction, and surprisingly didn't feel the anguish he had imagined. There was something liberating about openly defending what he believed in, even if it cost him his position. "I understand. I respect the board's decision, although I disagree with it. I will prepare the transition for an interim president immediately." As he gathered his papers, he added calmly, "Just a reminder, gentlemen, as founder and largest individual shareholder, I will maintain my seat on the board and my influence on strategic decisions. The Open Doors program will continue to be my priority one way or another." Upon leaving the room, Henry felt strangely light despite the gravity of the situation. In his office, Martha awaited him with a concerned expression. "Have you already heard?" he asked, noticing her look. "Rumors spread quickly," she confirmed. "What do you intend to do now?" Henry smiled with a serenity that surprised even himself. "Now? I'm going to pick up the children from school and visit Mrs. Zoe at the hospital. Tomorrow we'll think about the next professional steps." While arranging some personal belongings, his cell phone rang. It was Richard, the volunteer teacher from the Seeds of Tomorrow NGO whom he had met in the community. "Mr. Anderson, sorry to bother you, but I needed to share something incredible. That video that little Pete recorded at Claire's birthday, showing her playing with the children from the community. It ended up being published on social media and is going viral along with the news about your company's medication program." "What video?" asked Henry, confused. "Pete used my assistant's cell phone at the NGO to record a bit of the party. She published it without realizing the connection with you. Now people are sharing it as an example of authentic social inclusion, especially after they discovered that the girl in the wheelchair is the daughter of the businessman who wants to make medicines more accessible." Henry was momentarily speechless. The universe seemed to be conspiring to intertwine his personal and professional life in ways he could never have predicted. The video recorded by Pete spread through social media with impressive speed. In its quite genuine simplicity, it captured a rare moment. Claire in her wheelchair decorated with lights being pushed by Will and Matt on an improvised dance floor, while Jasmine commanded the spaceship on an intergalactic mission. The spontaneous laughter, the pure joy of the children, and mainly the visible transformation in Claire, from shy and isolated girl to confident commander of a shared adventure, touched something deep in those who watched. "It's simply unbelievable," commented Martha, showing the sharing statistics on her tablet. "More than 2 million views in less than 24 hours, and people are making the connection with the Open Doors program." Henry observed, fascinated, the comments that multiplied. If the man who opens the doors of his home to include children from the periphery is the same one who wants accessible medications, he has my total support. Open Doors. My mother had to sell her car to pay for treatment with Cardioprotect. If this program is real, it will save countless families from debt. That's Open Doors. Vital Med is showing that companies can be profitable and socially responsible. Other laboratories need to follow the example. Open Doors. The Us Open Doors hashtag had become a national trending topic, and the story was being echoed by traditional press. Journalists were desperately trying to contact Henry for exclusive interviews, and even politicians were beginning to express support for the initiative. "Is the board already aware of this?" asked Henry. "Impossible not to be," replied Martha. "Our public relations department is being flooded with positioning requests, and the company's shares rose another 4% just this morning." Henry reflected on the unexpected power of that small human connection captured on video. There was no strategic planning, no elaborate marketing campaign, just the simple truth of children overcoming social barriers through friendship. "Mr. Anderson," called Martha, interrupting his thoughts. "An urgent request for a meeting with the board just arrived for this afternoon. It seems they want to reconsider the removal." Henry smiled slightly. The public pressure was having an effect, faster than he could have imagined. But before he could respond, his cell phone rang. It was the hospital. "Mr. Anderson? This is Dr. Mendoza. Mrs. Zoe had an excellent evolution, and is ready to be discharged tomorrow. We just need to review the medication protocol and orientations for home recovery. Great news, Doctor. I'll be there in an hour. Hanging up the key. Phone. Henry made a decision. The meeting with the board would have to wait. Martha informed the board that I'll attend the meeting request, but only tomorrow. Today I have unavoidable commitments with my family. Martha's expression showed surprise. Never in all the years working with Henry had she seen him postpone a board meeting, especially in such critical circumstances for his career. Are you sure? They seem quite anxious. Absolutely. And please cancel all my appointments for today. I'm going to pick up the children from school earlier. We have big news to celebrate. When Henry arrived at Parkside Academy, the principal received him personally. Mr. Anderson, what a coincidence. We just watched Matt's demonstrative class on Native American astronomy. It's simply remarkable the knowledge that this boy possesses. Native American astronomy? Asked Henry, surprised. Yes, based on the books your daughter shared with him. The two prepared a presentation for the whole class. Miss Denise is delighted. Henry felt a wave of pride. Claire was not only opening up socially, but also sharing her knowledge and interests, creating bridges between worlds that rarely met. Upon gathering all the children, he shared the news about Mrs. Zoe's discharge. The joy was instantaneous, with hugs, jumps, and immediate plans for a welcome home party. But where will we have the party, Dad? Asked Claire, concerned. At the hospital, at our house, or at Mrs. Zoe's house? Henry realized he still hadn't talked to the children about his long-term plans. Since the beginning of Mrs. Zoe's hospitalization, he had been developing an idea that initially seemed absurd, but that made more sense each day. How about we talk about this with Mrs. Zoe right now? We can all go to the hospital and then decide together. At the Heart Institute, they found Mrs. Zoe sitting in an armchair near the window of her private room. She was still pale and visibly thinner, but her eyes had regained their characteristic shine. The joy of the reunion with the children brought tears to the eyes of all present. Just look at how beautiful you all are, all in uniform, she exclaimed, examining each one proudly. And you, Claire, seem to have grown in these weeks. I didn't grow, Mrs. Zoe, but I learned to do my own braid like Jasmine's, replied Claire, proudly displaying the hairstyle. After the initial excitement calmed down, Henry asked the children to wait in the corridor with Louise, the nurse, as he needed to talk privately with Mrs. Zoe. Mrs. Zoe, he began, sitting close to the armchair, in these weeks that the children have been with us, something extraordinary happened. Claire transformed completely. She's more confident, and more talkative, more happy, and I observed that the same happened with your little ones. Mrs. Zoe nodded with an understanding smile. Children need other children, Mr. Anderson. That's how they learn to navigate the world. Exactly. And that made me think, what do you think about formalizing a kind of permanent arrangement? Not to replace you, never, but to complement what you already do so well. The woman looked at him with curiosity. What kind of arrangement? I have an empty apartment on the same floor as mine, which I bought as an investment. There are 3 spacious bedrooms with a view similar to my penthouse. It could be yours and the children's if you accept. The children would continue studying where they are now. Claire would have the permanent company she so needs, and you, well, you would have all the necessary support for your recovery and to continue being the extraordinary matriarch that you are. Mrs. Zoe blinked several times, clearly stunned by the proposal. You're offering us an apartment in the Upper East Side? I'm offering a partnership, Henry gently corrected. You help me raise a happy and balanced daughter, and I help ensure that these incredible children have all the opportunities they deserve. Mrs. Zoe remained silent for several seconds, processing the proposal. When she finally spoke, her voice was choked with emotion. Mr. Anderson, Henry, your generosity moves me, but I have 2 concerns. First, I don't want the children to lose their roots, their connection to the community. Second, I need to maintain my independence and dignity. I can't simply accept such charity. Henry deeply admired this woman. Even weakened by illness, even confronted with an opportunity that many would accept without hesitation, She maintained her principles and concerns for the children's integral well-being. As for the first concern, I suggest we maintain active ties with the community. The children can participate in the Seeds of Tomorrow NGO activities, visit friends regularly, maintain their connections. We can even think about how to expand support to the community as a whole. Mrs. Zoe nodded, considering the idea. And as for your independence, Henry continued, I have a proposal. I recently initiated a program called Open Doors at my company. We urgently need someone who knows the reality of the families we want to serve, who understands their real needs, not just what executives imagine they are. Your life experience would be invaluable as a consultant for this program. Mrs. Zoe's eyes widened. You're offering me a job? I'm offering a consulting position that few people in America would be as qualified to occupy as you, with adequate remuneration and flexible hours that respect your recovery and responsibilities with the children. A slow smile began to form on Mrs. Zoe's face. You are a surprising man, Henry Anderson. When I first saw you, with your expensive suit and imposing posture, I thought, another rich man who feels guilty for a few minutes and then returns to his world. And you weren't entirely wrong, Henry admitted. But something changed, or rather you helped me rediscover something I had lost. Mrs. Zoe extended her hand, touching his in a simple but deeply meaningful gesture. We need to consult the children. I can't make a decision like this alone. Absolutely. In fact, it was Claire who first suggested something similar, in her own way. When the children were called back, Henry and Mrs. Zoe presented the idea as a possibility that everyone needed to consider together. The reactions were varied. Claire could barely contain her excitement. Matt seemed divided between enthusiasm and fear of the unknown. Jasmine asked practical questions about how they would maintain contact with friends from the community. Will was already imagining soccer matches in the building's playground, and little Pete and Amy were simply happy with the idea of all staying together. And our house in the community? Asked Jasmine, always attentive to important details. We can keep it, Mrs. Zoe replied, maybe even transform it into a space for the NGO or for other families in need. The conversation extended, with everyone contributing ideas, concerns, and dreams. It was a collective decision process, where each voice, including that of the youngest children, had value and was heard with respect. In the end, there was no definitive conclusion, just the commitment to continue the conversation in the coming days, respecting the time necessary for such a significant change. The next day, upon arriving at the VitalMed headquarters for the meeting with the board, Henry was surprised by the volume of people in the reception. Employees, journalists, and even some patients with support signs awaited his arrival. It's crazy out there, commented Mark Botero, meeting him in the private elevator. The repercussion of the video and the program exceeded any expectation. We have manifestations of support from patient associations, declarations from politicians across all spectrums, and even competitors are being pressured to adopt similar initiatives. Henry assimilated the information, aware that he had triggered something much larger than a corporate program. And the board? Do they still want my removal? Mark smiled enigmatically. Let's say there's been a significant change of perspective in the last 24 hours. In the meeting room, the atmosphere was completely different from the confrontation of the day before. Charles Drummond, who had led the removal motion, was the first to speak. Henry, after careful reflection and analysis of the extraordinary public response to the Open Doors program, the board has unanimously decided to withdraw the removal proposal and, in fact, reaffirm total confidence in your leadership. There were murmurs of agreement around the table. Henry observed with interest the transformation. There wasn't genuine sincerity in many of those faces, just the pragmatic recognition that the tide had turned. We appreciate your understanding regarding the initial skepticism, Drummond continued. It was our fiduciary obligation to question such a significant change in the business model, but recent events have proven your vision. In fact, intervened Sandra Millionaire'S, we would like to propose the immediate expansion of the program to include all 20 medications originally planned, not just the 5 from the pilot project. Henry smiled internally. It was fascinating to observe how apparently unshakable principles could quickly bend before public pressure and the potential for damage to corporate image. "I appreciate the reconsideration," he replied, maintaining professional composure. "And I agree with the program expansion, with one additional condition." The board remained silent, waiting. "I want to establish a consultative committee composed of patients, representatives of vulnerable communities, and public health professionals. They will have an active voice in the implementation and adjustments of the program, ensuring that we meet real needs, not just our assumptions about them." There was visible hesitation among the board members. One thing was to accept a price reduction initiative with image benefits. A completely different one was to share decision-making power with people outside the traditional corporate structure. "That's unusual," commented Richard Torres, legal director. "There would be corporate governance implications." "It's non-negotiable," Henry interrupted with quiet firmness. "If we want the Open Doors program to be authentic and effective, we need diverse voices guiding its development, and I already have the first person in mind to lead this committee." 3. Months later, the VitalMed headquarters was unrecognizable. In the main lobby, where before there was only a decorative fountain and abstract sculptures, now existed a welcoming space for patients seeking information about the Open Doors program. Photographs of real people benefited by the initiative replaced the generic corporate images, and a large screen continuously displayed moving testimonials from families who now had access to essential medications. On the 20th floor, a new meeting room had been specifically adapted for the Community Consultative Committee, led by Mrs. Zoe Sanders, now recovered and full of energy in her new function. The room contrasted with traditional corporate environments. It was welcoming, with colorful walls and decoration that mixed urban elements and references to different American cultures. "The impact has already surpassed our most optimistic projections," Mrs. Zoe explained to a group of international visitors, pointing to graphs in a presentation. "In just 3 months, more than 87,000 people who before didn't have access are now receiving adequate treatment. The stories that arrive daily are transformative." Henry observed the presentation from the back of the room with a discreet smile. Mrs. Zoe had adapted impressively quickly to the corporate environment, bringing a unique perspective that no MBA or executive training could offer. Her authenticity and knowledge of cause conquered even the most skeptical executives. "And most importantly," she continued, "is that we aren't just distributing cheaper medicines. We're building bridges between worlds that rarely communicate. When a doctor from Mount Sinai talks directly with a community health agent from Riverside Heights about the best way to ensure treatment adherence, everyone learns." In the apartment next to Henry's penthouse, the transformation was equally profound. The space that before was empty and impersonal now overflowed with life. The white walls had given way to vibrant colors, chosen by the children, framed. Photographs captured special moments of the new expanded family, and objects brought from the old house in the community, including plants, crafts, and even the solid wood dining table that had belonged to Mrs. Zoe's grandmother, created an environment that harmonized the two worlds. The children flourished in their new schools, but maintained strong ties with the community. On Saturdays, they actively participated in the Seeds of Tomorrow NGO projects, now installed in Mrs. Zoe's old house and beneficiary of a corporate partnership program from VitalMed. Claire, in turn, had transformed. The shy and isolated girl had become a confident and socially engaged child. Her wheelchair, far from being a limiting factor, had transformed almost into a symbol of union. The other children took turns decorating it according to the space missions they invented together, and Claire frequently offered rides to the little ones. On a Sunday afternoon, about 6 months after the birthday party that had changed everything, Henry organized a barbecue in the building's leisure area. It wasn't a special occasion, just a celebration of the everyday life they now shared. To his surprise, several neighbors who before barely greeted him appeared with their children, attracted by the contagious joy that radiated from the group. "Who would have thought," commented Mrs. Zoe, serving herself some salad, "that I would end up living on the Upper East Side, and you would be frequenting poetry recitals in Riverside Heights?" Henry laughed, recognizing the irony of the situation. Life has surprising paths. "You know what still intrigues me?" she asked, observing the children playing in the pool, with Claire supervising from the edge. "That sensation of familiarity when we met, as if we had already met before." Henry nodded. That impression had never completely abandoned him. "Maybe in another life," he suggested, half-jokingly. "Or maybe—" Mrs. Zoe hesitated, as if deciding if she should continue. "Remember when I mentioned that I took care of other children before these 5? Vaguely. One of them was the daughter of a young woman who worked for a rich family right here in New York. The mother had to leave the girl with me for almost a year while accompanying her employers during a season abroad." Mrs. Zoe made a significant pause. The girl's name was Helen. Henry felt a shiver run down his spine. Helen was the name of Claire's mother, his deceased wife. She would have been around 4 years old, curly brown hair, intense eyes. "This was more than 30 years ago," continued Mrs. Zoe. "When I saw her in your apartment for the first time, something in the decoration seemed familiar to me. Then I noticed a photograph of Claire with her mother and immediately recognized those eyes." Henry was stunned. Helen rarely talked about her childhood. He knew only that she had been raised by a single mother who had worked as a housekeeper for rich families. He had never imagined such an unlikely connection. You took care of Helen when she was little, Claire's mother?" Mrs. Zoe nodded with tears in her eyes. "The world is smaller than we imagine, isn't it? When you appeared in the community looking for me, something told me it wasn't a coincidence." At that moment, observing Claire and the other children playing, Henry understood that the doors that had opened in his life in the last few months weren't just metaphorical. They were real passages between worlds that seemed distant, but that had always been connected by invisible threads of shared humanity. "Dad, Mrs. Zoe, come see!" called Claire, excited. "We managed to teach Matt to float by himself." Exchanging an accomplice look, Henry and Mrs. Zoe walked together to the pool, where a small crowd of children was celebrating Matt's achievement. The boy, who a few months ago feared water, now floated on his back with a radiant smile, supported by the collective encouragement. It was an image that perfectly summarized the journey they had shared. The initial fear of the unknown, the courage to trust, the mutual support, and finally, the discovery that they could not only survive but flourish in new environments as long as they were together. That night, after the children fell asleep, Henry remained on the terrace of his penthouse, contemplating the lights of the city. New York extended in all directions, with its glaring contradictions and chaotic beauty. Somewhere beyond the luxury buildings of the Upper East Side, Riverside Heights was also preparing to sleep, with its own dreams and challenges. The boundaries between these worlds would continue to exist, he knew that. But now in his own life, a small bridge had been built. And perhaps one day, many other bridges would emerge, until the city was no longer an archipelago of isolated islands, but a continent of shared possibilities. With this comforting thought, Henry finally understood the true meaning of the Open Doors program. It wasn't just about accessible medications or corporate social responsibility. It was about recognizing that all doors